Hey class, Miss Anderson here. Today we are going to use all of the trig skills that you've learned in Unit 9 and wrap it up with some word problems. And so most of the things that you need to know for today's lesson you have already learned. There are two new things that we're going to talk about, and that's angle of elevation and angle of depression. So we are going to be looking at these two types of angles today. Now the angle of elevation is always measured from like the ground and upward, or from your line of sight, and it's measured upward and it's inside the triangle. And then so if you look at the example over here, we are measuring from the ground in this example, and we're looking at what is the angle that forms with this line that meets the top of the tree. So you're looking at from the ground and then up, and then the angle of elevation then is inside this triangle. And then you could use, if you knew how far it was from the base of the tree and the angle, you could find the height of the tree. And then angle of depression is always measured from looking down. And it's usually on the outside, or it's always on the outside of the triangle. And so angle of depression is measured, like let's say you're at the top of this lighthouse here and you are looking down and this person in the water. Well, your line of sight is right here. And so when you look down, the angle that you form looking down is right here. And so it's usually not inside the triangle. It's on the outside of the triangle. One nice thing though is that since your line of sight and the ground are both horizontal lines, or in this case the water, those are parallel. And so then you have this transversal that's cut here, and you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. If you remember that this angle and this angle then are called alternate interior angles, in which case if you have an angle of depression right here and then this makes a right triangle, then the angle of depression is also equal to the same spot right here. So you can take your angle of depression and put it at the bottom angle and figure that out, and then use that angle to figure out other pieces of the triangle. Another thing that you can do is that you know that if you have a vertical height and then the horizontal line of sight, then these two make 90 degrees. So if you know your angle of depression is 10 degrees, then this angle in here would be 70. So that's another way to find an angle inside the triangle. So basically, let's just go through it one more time. So you have angle of elevation and angle of depression. Let's say that you're standing down here and then your friend is standing up here on the third floor of the school. So you have your line of sight is right here, and then your friend's line of sight is right here. Okay? So when you look up to see your friend from the cafeteria up to the third floor, you are forming this line of sight and you are looking up at this angle. That would be the angle of elevation. Now your line of sight and that line to what you're looking at, so your original line of sight, like when you're looking straight forward, and then the angle that makes this right triangle. So then your horizontal line of sight, and then this distance, how far you're looking up, and then your line of sight to looking makes a right triangle. Angle of elevation is in that right triangle from your looking up distance. And then you can use that to either find, how far up they are, how far away you're standing, how long it is if you were to run a rope from your friend to you, how long that would be. One thing is, if you are measuring the distance from like how high it is, this height distance, just remember to add your height. Like let's say you're 5 feet and then you calculate this to be 10 feet, then really your friend here is going to be 15 feet above you. So if you are trying to find the horizontal height, or the vertical height, I mean, make sure to account for your height from where your eyes down, unless you are starting the angle of elevation on the ground. Now, if your friend is in the same situation, but this time your friend is the one looking down, then their angle of elevation, or I mean, they would have an angle of depression. So I'm just going to redraw it here. So they're standing up there and you're standing down here. And then they typically, this is their horizontal line of sight, but they're looking down at you. So it's creating that. The angle of depression is right here. But when you create the right triangle, you create the right triangle like this, similar to the same way we created the right triangle down here. So the angle of depression is on the outside of that triangle. So you need to then calculate this angle inside by either doing 90 minus that theta, or remembering that you have alternate interior angles and then theta is down there. So angle of elevation versus angle of depression. So looking up versus looking down, essentially. Okay, and besides that, I really think that you will have enough information to do all of these problems. I'm going to do one problem with you just to see, make sure that we are on the right track. Let's see. I think I'll just do the first one here. So from the top of the second one, from the top of a 120-foot high tower, air traffic controller observes an airplane on the runway at an angle of depression of 19 degrees. How far to the nearest foot from the base of the tower is the airplane? So if the air traffic controller is up in the tower and they're looking down at the runway, their angle of depression is right here. So in this diagram, the 19 degrees that he's looking down at goes right here. That is the 19-degree angle. And then the air traffic control tower is 120 feet. So that's where this 120 feet come in. And then we are looking for how far is the airplane away from the base of the tower. So we're looking for that distance. Now, given the angle of depression is 19 degrees, that does give us this angle down here will also be 19 degrees because of alternate interior angles. Or we know that the horizontal line of sight and the vertical do make a 90-degree angle because they're perpendicular to each other. So if you do 90 minus 19, that'd be 80, and then 71 degrees. So this would be 71 degrees here. You can get that angle inside there. Now, remember that this is the hypotenuse, and then it depends on what angle you use. If you use the 19-degree angle over here, it's going to be opposite, and this is going to be adjacent. And we want to use the opposite to help us find the adjacent. So then you think through SOHCAHTOA, and you want to pick tangent since it involves O and A. Now, if you do tangent of the angle is opposite over adjacent, so tangent of 19 degrees will be 120 feet over x. And then since we have x in the denominator, you will need to multiply both sides by x to clear that out. So then you get x times the tangent of 19 equals 120. And then you have to divide by the tangent of 19. And I had this up earlier. Let's see. Get my calculator up. So 120 divided by the tangent of 19. Let's just make sure I'm in the right mode. Yep, we got to be in degree mode. So 120 divided by the tangent of 19 is 348.5 to the nearest foot. So 348.5 will be about 349 feet. Okay. And then before I move on, the one thing I wanted to point out was that you could have also used the 71-degree angle, and that would have actually been easier because if you use the 71 degrees, then this is opposite and this is adjacent. So then the tangent of 71 degrees is x over 120. And since you're dividing by the 120, you have to multiply by the 120, and then you get x equals. And if you do 120 times the tangent of 71, you'll see that you get the same answer. So sometimes it's worth considering which angle you use to make the trig solving part of it a little bit easier. Then remember, if you want to find the angle inside the angle of elevation or angle of depression, you will have to use inverse trig to get the angles. So we're going to do notes a little differently now. I've done one for you. I want you to get in a group with 2 to 3 people, and I want you to pick 4 of these examples. So there's 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 is the most challenging one, so if you're up for a challenge, I do recommend that you do that. Think through it carefully. Once you have 4 questions done, you can either go on Schoology and check to make sure that your answers are correct, or you can check with the substitute and have her check your 4 questions. You can send one group member up, but once you get your 4 questions or your 4 problems and your notes done, if you get stuck, you can pull up the 9.7 completed notes on Schoology and look at my examples. And then you can have your homework. And once you finish that, you can use your time to work on some missing homework. Remember, we have a test on Friday. You can also work on some IXL stuff if you'd like. All right. Sorry I can't be there, guys. Thanks for watching. I have full faith that you're going to do great. Thank you.